Hello and welcome to Msit 5450, Section 31, Designing and Building a Cybersecurity Program. My name is Larry Wilson. I am the instructor for the class. And this week, week 4, we will be discussing technology and operations requirements. Here's the course outline. Week 1, course introduction and scope. Week 2, 3, 4, we talked about requirements. In week 2, business risk. Week 3, engineering design. In today's lecture, week 4, technology operations. Week 5, 6, 7, we talk about the workloads. Week 5, business risk. Week 6, engineering design. Week 7, technology operations. Week 8, 9, 10, we talk about the deliverables. Week 8, business risk. Week 9, engineering design. Week 10, technology operations. And then the last 4 lectures, week 11, 12, 13, 14, we talk about new capabilities that are occurring in cybersecurity. On the attack side, the MITRE attack framework. On the operations side, threat detection and response framework. On the application security framework. And on the controls, the cybersecurity maturity model certification framework, or CMMC. And then we'll summarize the course in week 15, course review and summary. Today's agenda will focus on 7 different parts. Part 1 is a technology overview. Part 2, 3, 4, and 5 focus on different security control standards. Part 2 is the CenterNet for Internet Security, CIS controls. Part 3 is NIST 853 Revision 4 security controls. Part 4 is the PCI Data Security Standard. And Part 5 is the ISO 27002 Code of Practice. All of these security controls can be operated out of a Security Operations Center. So Part 6 will discuss an Integrated Security Operations Center, where we operate the security controls and protect our critical assets. And then Part 7, we'll look at an operations case study, the global healthcare pandemic. Week 4 learning objectives. 1, understand the CIS controls. 2, the NIST 853 controls. 3, understand PCI data security standard, security requirements. And 4, ISO 27002 Code of Practice. Objective 5 is capabilities of an integrated SOC. And 6 is the operations requirements of a global healthcare pandemic. Part 1, we build secure, resilient systems and networks is really the goal of the operational security program. Functions, countermeasures, processes, safeguards that minimize any potential impact from a security risk is a security control. Again, functions, countermeasures, processes, safeguards that minimize the potential impact of risks. These include access control, security management, physical security, operation security, business continuity, application system security, and network security. There are layers of protection provided by controls. They're spread across networks, computers, and programs. At the highest layer, we have cyber risk management, strategy, policy, reports, incident response, supply chain, audit, assessment, training, and awareness. Beneath that, we have engineering, critical applications, asset management, network architecture, identity management, net flow, data flow monitoring. And at the operational level, we have physical security, ID cards, closed capture television, fences. We have network security, corporate and industrial control systems. We have firewall, sandbox, IDS, IPS, VPNs, monitoring and alerting. We have host-based security, timely patching of antivirus, restricting unwanted services, dynamic whitelisting, write and read protection, and we have application and data security, patching, encrypting sensitive data, etc. From a security operations perspective, we're securing the digital assets that run our critical infrastructure. So the first control standard that we're going to look at are the CIS controls, but keep in mind all of these control standards, whether it be CIS, NIST 853, PCI Data Security Standard, or ISO 27001, or even other control standards not covered in this class, are all designed to do the same thing, and these are to protect our critical infrastructure from cyber risks. So starting with the CIS controls, there are 20 critical controls, and these critical controls are designed to provide basic security capabilities. Control number 1 is inventory control of hardware assets. Number 2, inventory control of software assets. 3, continuous vulnerability management. 4, controlled use of administrative privileges. 5, secure configuration of hardware and software. 6, maintenance, monitoring, analysis of audit logs. 7, email and web browser protections. 8, malware defenses. 9, limit and control of ports, protocols, and services. 10 is data recovery. 11, secure configuration of network devices. 12, boundary defense. 13, data protection. 14, controlled access based on the need to know. 15, wireless access control. 16, account monitoring and control. 17 is security awareness and training. 18 is application software security. 19, incident response and management. And 20, pen tests and red team exercises. So the CIS controls are a prioritized set of actions that collectively form a defense-in-depth set of best practices that mitigate the most common attacks against systems and networks. The controls were developed by a community of IT experts who apply their first-hand experience as cyber defenders to create these globally accepted security best practices. The experts who developed the CIS controls come from a wide range of sectors, including retail, manufacturing, healthcare, education, government, defense, and others. Controls have been matured by an international community of individuals and institutions to share insight into attacks and attackers, identify root cause, translate that into classes of defensive action, document stories of adoption, share tools to solve problems, track the evolution of threats, capabilities of adversaries, current vectors of intrusions, map the controls to regulatory and compliance frameworks, and bring collective priority and focus to them, and share tools, working aids, translations, identify common problems like initial assessment, implementation roadmaps, and solve them as a community. These activities ensure that CIS controls are not just another set of good things to do, but a prioritized, high-focused set of actions, have a community support and network to make them implementable, usable, scalable, compliant with all industry or government security requirements. The controls are broken into 3 different sectors. Sector 1 or Category 1 are basic controls, Category 2 foundational controls, Category 3 organizational controls. Controls 1 through 6 make up the basic security controls. These are key controls that should be implemented in every organization for essential cyber defense readiness. Basic controls are a must for every organization, regardless of the size or industry in question. CIS refers to these controls as cyber hygiene, the basic things you must do to create a strong foundation for your defense. By implementing Control 1 through 6 as a continuous and evolving process, organizations reduce risk while adapting to both changing threats and changing business demands. The Category 2 controls are called the foundational security controls, Controls 7 through 16. They're the next step up from basic. These technical best practices provide clear security benefits and are a smart move for any organization to implement. These areas can help enterprises shore up their security after they've mastered the basic controls. A phased implementation approach helps to ensure that organizations receive the most significant benefits by implementing the highest priority control first. And then finally, we have Category 3, which are the organizational controls, Control 17 through 20. These are different in character from 1 through 16. While they have technical elements, they are more focused on people and process involved in cybersecurity. They're less technical. They address the potential skills gaps in the workforce and help identify behavior that might leave systems vulnerable. So let's walk through each of the 20 critical controls. Control 1 is inventory of hardware assets. Actively manage, inventory, track, and correct all hardware devices on the network so that only authorized devices are given access. Unauthorized, unmanaged devices are found and prevented from gaining access. Control 2 is inventory control of software assets. Actively manage all software on the network so only authorized software is installed and can execute. Unauthorized, unmanaged software is found and prevented from installation or execution. Control 3 is continuous vulnerability management. Continuously acquire, assess, take action on new information to identify vulnerabilities, remediate, minimize the window of opportunity for attackers. Control 4 is controlled use of administrative privileges, processes and tools to track, control, prevent, correct the use, assignment, configuration of administrative privileges on computers, networks, and applications. Control 5 is secure configuration for mobile devices, laptops, workstations, and servers. Establish, implement, and manage, track, report on, and correct the security configuration of mobile devices, laptop servers, workstations, using a rigorous configuration management change control process in order to prevent attackers from exploiting vulnerable services and settings. Control 6, maintenance, monitoring, analysis of audit logs. Collect, manage, analyze audit logs of events that could help detect, understand, or recover from an attack. Control 7, email and web browser protections. Minimize the attack surface and the opportunities for attackers to manipulate human behavior through their interaction with web browsers and email systems. Control number 8, malware defenses. Control the installation, spread, execution of malicious code at multiple points in the enterprise while optimizing the use of automation to enable rapid updating of defense, data gathering, corrective action. Control number 9 is limit and control network ports, protocols, and services. Manage, track, control, correct ongoing operational use of ports, protocols, and services on network devices in order to minimize windows of vulnerability available to an attacker. Control 10 is data recovery capabilities, a process and tools used to properly back up critical information with a proven methodology for timely recovery of it. Control 11 is secure configuration for network devices, including firewalls, routers, and switches. Establish, implement, actively manage, track, report on, correct the security configuration of network infrastructure devices using a rigorous configuration management and change control process in order to prevent attackers from exploiting vulnerable services and settings. Control number 12 is boundary defense. Detect, prevent, correct the flow of information transferring across networks of different trust levels with a focus on security damaging data. Control 13 is data protection. Processes and tools to prevent data exfiltration, mitigate the effects of exfiltrated data, ensure the privacy and integrity of sensitive information. Tools exist that can prevent and detect the leakage or loss of proprietary data. Control 14 is controlled access based on the need to know. Processes and tools to track, control, prevent, correct, secure access to critical assets, information, resources, and systems, according to the formal determination of which persons, computers, and applications have a need and a right to access these critical assets based on an approved classification. Control number 15 is wireless access control. Processes and tools to track, control, prevent, correct the secure use of wireless local area networks, access points, and wireless client systems. Control 16 is account monitoring and control. Actively manage the lifecycle of system and application accounts, their creation, use, dormancy, deletion in order to minimize opportunities for attackers to leverage them. Control 17 is implement a security awareness and training program for all functional roles in the organization, prioritizing those mission critical to the business and its security, identify the specific knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to support defense of the enterprise, develop and execute an integrated plan to assess, identify gaps, remediate through policy, organizational planning, training, and awareness programs. Control number 18 is application software security, manage the security lifecycle of all in-house developed and acquired software in order to prevent, detect, and correct security weaknesses. Control number 19 is incident response and management, protect the organization's information as well as its reputation by developing and implementing an incident response infrastructure, plans, roles, training, communications, management oversight for quickly discovering an attack, effectively containing the damage, eradicating the attacker's presence, restoring the integrity of the network and systems. And Control 20 is pen tests and red team exercise. Test the overall strength of the organization's defense, technology, process, and people by simulating the objectives and the actions of an attacker. And here's a mapping of the CIS controls in this cybersecurity framework. In all cases, we want to make sure that our operational level controls align with our risk level framework. Again, the NIST cybersecurity framework is a framework of functions that we want to put in place before, during, and after the attack. The 5 core functions are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, as well as 23 categories that map to the functions. Under identify, we have asset management, business environment, governance, risk assessment, risk management, and supply chain. Under protect, we have access control, awareness and training, data security, information protection procedures, maintenance, and protective technology. Under detect, we have anomalies and events, continuous monitoring and detection processes. Under respond, we have response planning, communications, analysis, mitigation, and improvements. Under recover, we have recovery planning, implementation, and improvements and communications. And we want to make sure that our CIS controls map to our categories as well as our functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And here you can see strong alignment between the NIST cybersecurity framework and the CIS controls. The next or second control standard is NIST 853 revision 4. Here we have 18 control families: access control, awareness and training, audit and accountability, security assessment and authorization, configuration management, contingency planning, identification and authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection, physical environmental protection, planning, personnel security, program management, risk assessment, system and services acquisition, system and communications protection, and system and information integrity. Some of these controls are technical, such as access control, audit and accountability, identification and authentication, system and communication protection. Others are operational, awareness and training, configuration management, contingency planning, incident response, maintenance, media protection, physical environmental protection, personnel security, and system and information integrity. And others are more management focused: security assessment and authorization, planning, program management, risk assessment, system and services acquisition. So the combination of management controls, technical controls, and operational controls, these are the different classes of controls for the NIST 853 controls families. So let's go through each of the 18 families. Access control is a fundamental component of data security that dictates who's allowed to access and use company information and resources. Access control ensures users are who they say they are and that they have appropriate access to company data. It can also be applied to limit physical access to buildings, rooms, and data centers. Awareness and training is a formal process for educating employees about computer security. A good security awareness program should educate employees about corporate policies and procedures for working with information technology. Regular training is particularly necessary in organizations with high turnover and rates that those that apply heavily on contract or temporary staff. Audit and accountability ensures auditable evidence for system transaction and key recs are available for a sufficient amount of time. If system crashes, hacked, or someone fat fingers an entry, there are ways to recover data and trace back and roll back changes. Security assessment and authorization is a two-step process that ensures the security of information systems. Assessment is a process of evaluating, testing, and examining security controls that have been predetermined based on the data type in an information system. Authorization is a process of accepting the residual risks associated with the continued operation of a system, granting approval to operate for a specific period of time. Configuration management is the process of systemically handling changes to a system in a way that it maintains its integrity over time. Configuration management process ensures that selected components of a complete IT service system or product, such as the configuration item, are identified, baseline, maintained, and that changes to them are controlled. Contingency planning is a course of action designed to help an organization respond to a significant future event or situation that may not happen. It may or may not happen. A contingency plan is sometimes referred to as a plan B. It can also be used as an alternative for action if expected results fail to materialize. Contingency planning is a component of business continuity, disaster recovery, and risk management. Identification and authentication. Identification is the ability to identify uniquely a user of a system or an application that's running on the system. Authentication is the ability to prove that a user or an application is genuinely who that person or what that application claims to be. Consider a user who logs onto a system by entering a user ID and a password. The system uses the user ID to identify the user. The system authenticates the user at the time of login by checking that the supplied password is correct. Incident response is an organized approach to managing the aftermath of a security breach or cyber attack, also known as an IT incident, computer incident, or security incident. The goal is to handle the situation in a way that limits damage, reduces recovery time and costs. Ideally, incident response activities are conducted by the organization, Computer Security Incident Response Team, or the CSIRT. Maintenance is the technical meaning of maintenance, involves functional checks, servicing, repairing, and replacing of devices, equipment, machinery, building infrastructure supporting utilities and industrial, business, government, and residential installations. Media protection. Media includes both digital media, disks, magnetic tapes, external removable hard drives, mobile devices, including portable storage media, such as USB memory sticks, portable computing and communications devices with storage capability, such as a notebook, laptop, tablet, smartphone, cell phone, digital camera, audio recording devices, non-digital media, such as paper or microfilm. Security measures must be implemented commensurate with the potential risks to individuals or institutions from unauthorized disclosure or loss of integrity. Physical environmental protection establishes requirements to ensure that the information assets are protected by physical and environmental controls that prevent tampering, damage, theft, or unauthorized physical access. The objective is to maintain secure physical environment to protect unauthorized access, damage, and interference to business premises. Planning involves the development of a system security plan. The system security plan is the main document of a security package in which a cybersecurity professional describes all the security controls in use on the information system and their implementation. And once completed, a system security plan provides a detailed narrative of a security control implementation, a detailed system description, including the components and service inventory, and a detailed description of the system's data flows and authorization boundary. Program management involves developing and disseminating an organization-wide information security program plan that provides an overview of the requirements of the security program and a description of security program management controls in place or planned for meeting those requirements. In addition, program management controls provide sufficient information to enable an implementation that is unambiguously compliant with the intent of the plan and a determination of the risk to be incurred if the plan is implemented as intended. Finally, the program management plan includes roles, responsibilities, management commitment, coordination amongst entities, and compliance requirements. Personnel security is a system of policies and procedures which seek to mitigate the risk of workers, insiders, exploiting their legitimate access to an organization's assets for unauthorized purposes. People security is about shaping and controlling the environment to promote vigilance and an effective security culture, influence and deter those seeking to cause harm. Capabilities include background screening prior to employment, training and awareness during employment, removal of access permissions, return of equipment after employment termination. A risk assessment is a term used to describe the overall process or method where you identify hazards and risk factors or threats have the potential to cause harm, which is threat identification, analyze and evaluate the risk associated with the hazard, risk analysis and evaluation, and determine the appropriate ways to eliminate or control the risk when it cannot be eliminated, which is called risk control. A risk assessment is a thorough look at the enterprise to identify those things, situations, processes that may cause harm. After identification is made, you analyze and evaluate how likely and severe the risk is. When this determination is made, you can next decide what measures you want to put in place to effectively eliminate or control the harm from happening. Systems and services acquisition. Protect information systems by assuring systems, components, and services are acquired, are secure, and do not negatively impact security of pre-existing systems. Functions include security requirements and acquisition contracts for information systems, system components, or information system services. Other system security acquisition controls requires developers of the information system component, or information system service to provide design and implementation information for the security controls to be employed, and to identify the functions, ports, protocols, services intended for organizational use early in the system development lifecycle. System communications protection. Ensure system operators, managers separate user functionality, including user interface services, from information system management functionality in its systems. This control family prevents unauthorized, unintended information transfer via shared system resources, protects systems against the limit or the effects of denial of service attacks, implements boundary controls that protect the external boundary as well as key internal boundaries identified in the system security plan. System and information integrity. Ensure the integrity of information systems. Capabilities include software firmware updates related to flaw remediation and to employ malicious code protection mechanisms at information systems entry and exit points to detect and to eradicate malicious code. In addition, information system monitoring is used to monitor information systems to detect attacks, indicators of potential attacks, in accordance with continuous monitoring policies, standards, and procedures in unauthorized local, network, and remote connections. So those are the 18 controls families of the NIST 853 controls. And here you can see, again, strong alignment with the NIST 853 controls as they are mapped against the NIST cybersecurity framework. Next, we'll talk about PCI data security standard. Here we have 12 requirements. Those 12 requirements are organized into 6 different areas. The first area is secure network. The second area is secure data. Third area, vulnerability management. Fourth area, access control. Fifth area is monitoring and testing. And the sixth area is information security policy. So under build and maintain a secure network, we have install and maintain a firewall configuration to protect cardholder data and do not use vendor supplied defaults for system passwords and other security parameters. Under the area of protecting cardholder data, protect stored cardholder data, encrypt transmission of cardholder data across open public networks. Maintaining a vulnerability management program, we have 2 requirements: use and regularly update antivirus software programs, develop and maintain secure systems and applications. Under implement strong access control, we have 3 requirements: restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know, assign a unique ID to each person with computer access, restrict physical access to cardholder data. Under test and monitor networks, we have 2 requirements: track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data, and test security systems and processes. And finally, maintain an information security policy, and we only have 1 requirement, and that is to maintain the policy that addresses information security for all personnel. So let's walk through the 12 requirements. Number 1, install and maintain a firewall configuration to protect cardholder data. Firewalls are devices that control computer traffic allowed between an entity's networks, internal and untrusted networks external, as well as traffic into and out of more sensitive areas within an entity's internal trusted network. A firewall examines all network traffic and blocks those transmissions that do not meet the specified security criteria. All systems must be protected from unauthorized access from untrusted networks, whether entering the system via the internet, as e-commerce, employee internet access through desktop browsers, employee email, dedicated connections such as business-to-business connections, wireless networks, or other sources. Often seemingly insignificant paths to and from untrusted networks can provide unprotected pathways into key systems. Firewalls are a key protection mechanism for any computer network. The second requirement is do not use vendor-supplied defaults for system passwords and other security parameters. Malicious individuals, external and internal to an entity, often use vendor's default passwords and other vendor default settings to compromise systems. These passwords and settings are well known by hacker communities, easily determined by public information. Requirement number 3 is to protect stored cardholder data. And remember, PCI is focused on cardholder. So if you want to use the PCI security controls, you can substitute the word enterprise data or critical data for cardholder data, and the same security controls would apply. Protection methods such as encryption, truncation, masking, and hashing are critical components of cardholder data protection. If an intruder circumvents other security controls and gains access to encrypted data, without the proper cryptographic keys, the data is unreadable and unusable to that person. Other effective methods of protecting stored data would be to consider as a potential risk mitigation opportunities. Number 4 is encrypt transmission of data across public networks. Sensitive information must be encrypted during transmission over networks that are easily accessed by malicious individuals. Misconfigured wireless networks and vulnerabilities in legacy encryption and authentication protocols continue to be targets of malicious individuals who exploit these vulnerabilities to gain privileged access to cardholder data environments. Requirement number 5, protect all systems against malware and regularly update antivirus software or programs. Malicious software, commonly referred to as malware, including viruses, worms, and Trojans, enters the network during many business-approved activities, including employee email and use of the internet, mobile computers, storage devices, resulting in the exploitation of system vulnerabilities. Antivirus software must be used on all systems commonly affected by malware to protect systems from current and evolving malicious software threats. Requirement 6, to develop and maintain secure systems and applications. Unscrupulous individuals use security vulnerabilities to gain privileged access to systems. Many of these vulnerabilities are fixed by vendor-provided security patches, which must be installed by the entities that manage the systems. All systems have appropriate software patches to protect against the exploitation and compromise of cardholder data by malicious individuals and malicious software. Note, appropriate software patches are patches that have been evaluated and tested sufficiently to determine that the patches do not conflict with existing security configurations. For in-house developed applications, numerous vulnerabilities can be avoided by using standard system development processes and secure coding techniques. Requirement 7, restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know. To ensure critical data can only be accessed by authorized personnel, systems and processes must be in place to limit the access based on the need to know and according to job responsibilities. Need to know is when access rights are granted only the least amount of data and privileges needed to perform a job. Requirement 8 is identify and authenticate access to system components. Assigning unique identification to each person with access ensures that each individual is uniquely accountable for their actions. When such accountability is in place, actions taken on critical data in a system performed by and can be traced to known and authorized users and processes. The effectiveness of a password is largely determined by the design and implementation of the authentication system, particularly how frequently password attempts can be made by an attacker, security methods to protect user passwords at the point of entry, during transmission, and while in storage. Note, these requirements are applicable for all accounts, including point-of-sale accounts with administrative capabilities and all accounts used to view or access cardholder data or to access systems with cardholder data. This includes accounts used by vendors and other third-party providers. Requirement 9, restrict physical access to cardholder data. Any physical access to data or systems that house cardholder data provides the opportunity for individuals to access devices or data and remove systems or hard copies and should be appropriately restricted. For purposes of Requirement 9, on-site personnel refers to full-time and part-time employees, temporary employees, contractors, consultants who are physically present on the entity's premises. A visitor refers to a vendor, guest, or on-site personnel service worker, anyone who needs to enter the facility for a short duration, usually not more than a day. And media refers to all paper and electronic media containing cardholder data. Number 10, track and monitor access to network resources and cardholder data. Logging mechanisms and the ability to track user activities are critical in preventing, detecting, minimizing the impact of data compromise. The presence of logs in all environments allows thorough tracking, alerting, analysis when something goes wrong. Determining the cause of a compromise is difficult, if not impossible, without system activity logs. Number 11, regularly test security systems and processes. Vulnerabilities are discovered continually by malicious individuals and researchers and being introduced by new software, system components, processes, custom software should be tested and to ensure that security controls continue to reflect the changing environment. And finally, number 12, maintain a policy that addresses information security for all personnel. A strong security policy sets the security tone for the entity informs personnel what is expected from them. All personnel should be aware of the sensitivity of data and their responsibilities for protecting it. Personnel refers to full-time, part-time employees, temporary employees, contractors, consultants who are resident on the entity's site or otherwise have access to the cardholder data environment. And here's a mapping of the PCI data security standard controls, or the 12 requirements, back to the NIST cybersecurity framework. Once again, strong alignment. And finally, we're going to cover the ISO 27002 Code of Practice. This is the summary of the Code of Practice for ISO 27002. It starts with requirement number 5, information security policies, 6, organization of information security, 7, human resources security, 8, asset management, 9, access control, 10, cryptography, 11, physical environmental security, 12, operations security, 13, communication security, 14, system acquisition, development, maintenance, 15, supplier relations, 16, information security incident management, 17, information security aspects of business continuity management, and 18, compliance. So ISO is an international standard of good practice for the information security. ISO's 27002 lineage is back more than 30 years to precursors of British standard 177199. Like governance and risk management, information security management is a broad topic with ramifications throughout all organizations. Information security and therefore ISO 27002 is relevant to all types of organizations, including commercial enterprises of all sizes, any organization that handles and depends on information. The specific information security risk and control requirements may differ in detail, but there are a lot of common ground. For instance, most organizations need to address the information risk relating to employees, contractors, consultants, external suppliers of information services. And the ISO standard is explicitly concerned with information security, meaning the security of all forms of information, such as computer data, documentation, knowledge, and intellectual property, not just IT systems and network security. Logical structure and use. The standard is structured logically around groups of related security control. Organizations that adapt or adopt ISO 27002 assess their own information risk, clarify their control objectives, and apply suitable controls or indeed other forms of risk treatment using this standard for guidance. So ISO 27002, it consists of 14 control clauses, 35 control objectives, which we'll cover, and then in addition 114 control clauses is the standard structure within each control clause, one or more first-level subsections, each one stating a control objective, and each control objective being supported by one or more controls themselves, each control followed by the associated implementation guidance. The 35 control objectives are at a fairly high level and in effect comprise of generic function requirements and specifications for organizations' information security management architecture. Some of the control objectives are not applicable in every case, and their generic wording is unlikely to reflect the precise requirements of every organization, especially given the very wide range of organizations and industries to which the standard applies. This is why ISO 27001 requires a statement of applicability, laying out unambiguously which information security controls are or are not required by the organization, as well as the implementation status. And we have 114 controls giving it under ISO 27002. However, the headline figure is somewhat misleading since the implementation guidance recommends numerous actual controls in the details. So we're going to walk through the 14 control clauses. Control clause 5 is information security policy. Here we have 2 control objectives: management direction for information security. Management should define a set of policies to clarify their direction of and support for information security. Control clause 6, organization of information security, has 2 control objectives. Internal organization, the organization should lay out the roles and responsibilities for information security, allocate them to individuals, and where relevant, duties should be segregated across roles and individuals to avoid conflicts of interest and prevent inappropriate activities. There should be contacts with relevant external authorities such as cyber emergency response teams and special interest groups. On information security matters, information security should be an integral part of the management of all types of a project. The second control objective under organization of information security is mobile devices and teleworking, and there should be security policies and controls for mobile devices such as laptops, tablets, wearable devices, smartphones, USB gadgets, and teleworking such as telecommuting, working from home, road warrior, remote virtual workplaces. The next control clause is 7, human resources security. Here we have 3 different control objectives. The first is prior to employment. Information security responsibilities should be taken into account when recruiting permanent employees, contractors, and temporary staff through adequate job descriptions, pre-employment screening, and included in contracts, terms and conditions of employment, other signed agreements defining security roles, responsibilities, compliance obligations. During employment, managers should ensure employees and contractors are made aware of and motivated to comply with their information security obligations. A formal disciplinary process is necessary to handle information security incidents allegedly caused by workers. Termination and change of employment, security aspects of a person's departure from the organization or significant change of roles within it should be managed, such as returning corporate information and equipment in their possession, updating their access rights, reminding them of their ongoing obligations under privacy and intellectual property laws, contractual terms, etc., plus ethical expectations. Under the Asset Management Control Clause, we have 3 control objectives. Responsibility for assets. All information assets should be inventoried. Owners should be identified, held accountable for their security. Acceptable use policies should be defined, and assets should be returned when people leave the organization. Information classification. Information should be classified and labeled by its owner according to the security protection needed and handled appropriately. And media handling. Information storage media should be managed, controlled, moved, and disposed of in a way that the information content is not compromised. Under Access Control Clause, we have 4 control objectives. Business requirements of access control. Organizations' requirements to control access to information assets should be clearly documented in access control policy and procedures. Network access and connection should be restricted. User access management. The allocation of access rights to users should be controlled from initial user registration through to removal of access rights when no longer required, including special restrictions for privileged access rights and management of passwords called secret authentication information, plus regular reviews and updates of access rights. User responsibilities. Users should be made aware of the responsibilities towards maintaining effective access controls, choosing strong passwords, keeping them confidential. System and application access control. Information access should be restricted in accordance with access control policy, such as secure logon, password management, control over privileged utilities, restricted access to program source code. And under Cryptography Control Clause, we have only a single control objective, cryptographic controls. There should be a policy on the use of encryption plus cryptographic authentication integrity controls, such as digital signatures and message authentication codes, as well as cryptographic key management. Physical and environmental security control clause. There are 2 control objectives. Secure areas are defined physical perimeters and barriers with physical entry controls and working procedures should protect the premises, the offices, the room, delivery loading areas against unauthorized access. Specialist advice should be sought regarding protection against fires, floods, earthquakes, bombs, etc. And equipment security. Equipment plus supporting utilities such as power and air conditioner, as well as cabling, should be secured and maintained. Equipment and information should not be taken off site unless authorized, must be adequately protected both on and off site. Information must be destroyed prior to storage media being disposed of or reused. Unattended equipment must be secured, and there should be a clear desk and clear screen policy. Under Operations Security Control Clause, we have 7 control objectives. Operational procedures and responsibility. IT operational responsibilities and procedures should be documented. Changes to IT facilities and systems should be controlled. Capacity and performance should be managed. Development, test, and operational systems should be separated. Protection from malware. Malware controls are required, including user awareness. Backups. Appropriate backups should be taken and retained in accordance to a backup policy. Logging and monitoring. System user, administrator, operator activities. Exceptions, false information security events should be logged and protected. Clocks should be synchronized. Control of operational software. Software installation on operational systems should be controlled. Technical vulnerability management. Technical vulnerabilities should be patched, and there should be rules in place governing software installation by users. And information system audit considerations. IT audit should be planned and controlled to minimize adverse effects on production systems or inappropriate data access. Communications Security Control Clause has 2 objectives. Network security management. Networks and network services should be secured, for example, by segregation and information transfer. There should be policies, procedures, and agreements, such as non-disclosure agreements, concerning information transfer to from third parties, including electronic messaging. System Acquisition, Development, and Maintenance Control Clause has 3 control objectives. Security requirements of information systems. Security control requirements should be analyzed and specified, including web applications and transactions. Security and development and support processes. Rules governing secure software systems development should be defined as policy. Changes to system, both application and operating system, should be controlled. Software packages should ideally not be modified, and secure system engineering principles should be followed. Development and environment should be secured, and outsourced development should be controlled. System security should be tested and acceptance criteria defined to include security aspects. And then test data. Test data should be carefully selected, generated, and controlled. Under the control clause, supplier relationships, 2 control objectives, information security and supplier relationships. There should be policies, procedures, awareness, etc., to protect the organization's information that is accessible to IT outsourcers and other external suppliers through the supply chain agreed with the contracts or agreements. And supplier service delivery management. Service delivery by external suppliers should be monitored and reviewed or audited against the contracts and agreements. Service changes should be controlled. Control clause 16 is information security incident management. Here we have one objective: management information security incidents and improvements. There should be responsibilities and procedures to manage, report, assess, respond to, and learn from information security events, incidents, and weaknesses consistently and effectively, and to collect forensic evidence. Under Control Clause 17, information security aspects of business continuity management, we have 2 control objectives. Information security continuity. The continuity of information security should be planned, implemented, and reviewed as an integral part of the organization's business continuity management systems. And redundancies. IT facilities should have sufficient redundancy to satisfy availability requirements. And finally, Control Clause 18 is compliance. We have 2 control objectives: compliance with legal and contractual requirements. The organization must identify and document its obligation to external authorities and other third parties in relation to information security, including intellectual property, business records, privacy, personally identifiable information, and cryptography. And information security reviews control objective. The organization's information security arrangements should be independently reviewed or audited and reported to management. Managers should also routinely review employees and systems compliance with security policies, procedures, etc., and initiate corrective actions when necessary. So those are the controls families for the ISO 27002, the 14 families. And as you can see, these 14 families have a strong alignment with the NIST cybersecurity framework. So the CIS controls, the NIST 853 controls, the PCI controls, and the ISO 27002 controls all have a strong alignment to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So what does that mean? That means by implementing any of these control standards, you have effectively implemented the requirements or the functions and categories of the controls that are defined by the NIST cybersecurity framework. So how do we monitor and manage and operate? We do that through a security operations center. So the 5 things that a SOC are, according to Gartner: proactive detection of malicious network and system activity. You want to know as quickly as possible to minimize the effect of a breach. And the way you do proactive detection is you implement the security controls and you make sure that those are in place, and you detect any vulnerabilities, any misconfigurations, or any events that would identify that those controls have failed and that a vulnerability has been compromised. Secondly, threat awareness, to adjust defenses before the threat hits you. And once again, the NIST cybersecurity framework and the operational controls that we just discussed all map to a cyber attack based on the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. Some of those controls are in place before the attack, some are in place during the attack, and some are in place after the attack. Vulnerability management, to see what may be vulnerable in the network to new threats before you get hit with them. Once again, the controls mitigate vulnerabilities. Awareness on hardware and software assets running in the network. Should be aware of developing threats to them. If we follow the risk management framework, before we implement security controls, we need to understand what is our authorization boundary, and the awareness of hardware and software assets really complies with understanding your authorization boundary. And finally, log management. These are the events that give us the ability to complete forensics if we do occur an incident or a breach. Log management is included with all of these control standards that we just discussed. It's a key component of the detect capability of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and therefore the main purpose of a security operations center is to collect the logs from all the devices in order to determine whether or not an incident has occurred. Staying ahead of cyber threats is hard. Detecting unknown or hidden threats is even harder, especially when existing point and legacy security tools can't address the complexity and the volume of advanced security threats. And this is where an integrated security operations center is of value. An ISOC is designed to collect, integrate, analyze alarms and logs from these traditionally siloed organizations, providing a much greater situational awareness to a utilities security team. Additionally, an ISOC allows utilities to transition an intelligence-driven approach to incident management, which is more effective for handling advanced threats. Because of these advantages, creating an ISOC may provide significant value, such as unified corporate information technology, operational technology, security incident management, optimization of resources, improved threat analysis, unified configuration and patch management, more efficient forensics, and root cause analysis. Building an ISOC requires significant technical resources, staff, and time. There may be considerable organizational barriers that have to be overcome for the deployment to be successful. Here's the ISOC architecture, the main components of an integrated security operations center. We have physical security firewalled off so that we make sure we monitor all the access to our buildings and our rooms and our premises. We have corporate system security on information security of computer systems, printers, devices, mobile devices. We have external sources of information, ISAC, certs, law enforcement, etc. We have a control center where all the logs that are collected and analyzed are centralized into a control center, where we not only include operational technology, we include information technology, and we include physical security that we're monitoring along with the external sources of information. And then finally, in an industrial situation, we have operational technology such as substations and field equipment. We collect that information through SCADA devices to incorporate that into an integrated security operations center. So here's a diagram of a typical integrated security operations center architecture where we collect logs and analyze logs from multiple different areas. How an ISOC works, we have many different functions or capabilities that we use to collect information: honeypots, mail, VPN, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, websites, firewalls, unified threat management, event management consoles, databases, data centers, access controls, etc., are all aggregated and correlated into a central SIM. And from that SIM, we generate alerts, reports, and advisories, which basically tell us what's going on within the environment that we're managing. From a people, process, and technology perspective, we have all kinds of different technologies that report back to the SIM: indicators of compromise, web servers, proxy servers, user accounts, intrusion detection, threat intelligence, firewalls, clouds, Internet of Things devices, endpoints, networks, applications, etc., all aggregated information into a SIM. We then have people, level 1 analysts, level 2 analysts, and engineers, and those people look for events that are potential incidents. They would escalate those that they believe are incidents to network and system owners, and then those network and system owners would do the investigation and determine whether or not, in fact, there was an incident, and close the case if there was no incident, and handle it based on incident response procedures if it, in fact, was an incident. There are levels of maturity within SOCs. Level of an integrated SOC. Level 0 is incomplete. Operational elements do not exist. Level 1 is performed. Minimum compliance requirements to provide security monitoring. Level 2 is managed. Business goals are met. Operational tasks are repeatable. Level 3 is defined. Operations are well defined, subjectively evaluated, and flexible. Level 4 is measured. Operations are quantitatively evaluated, reviewed consistently, and proactively improved. And level 5 is optimized. Operational improvement program has been implemented to track any deficiencies, ensure all lessons learned, drive continual improvement. Here's a diagram that shows the workflow of a SOC, not necessarily the technology, but more the workflow. Here we have the asset zone and the control zone. In the asset zone, we have users, clouds, applications, servers, networks, any device that needs to be monitored that are generating logs and events. Those are collected into a correlation database, and also added to that database as threat intelligence and indicators of compromise. Those are all stored in a security data warehouse. In the control zone, where our individuals, our SOC workforce resides, we have SOC workflow, where those logs and events generate alerts based on crossing certain thresholds. The security level 1 analysts investigate those incidents through real-time monitoring, the processing increasing number of events, real-time correlation against indicators of compromise, reduced number of false positives. If they feel that any of those alerts, in fact, may potentially become an incident, they would escalate that to a layer 2 analyst or a security analyst level 2. And the level 2 analyst would have the ability to custom query across environment and timeframes, construct blast zones, environment, and remediate do more detailed investigation of the particular incident to determine if it in fact is a security event. We also can be proactive in our security operations centers. We have hunt teams who are looking for indicators of compromise, looking for potential events that are not necessarily alerted. Analytics drive hunt for unknown threats with deep analytics, machine learning, identify new indicators of compromise to improve monitoring. So there's an increasing level of maturity between our level 1 analysts, our level 2 analysts, and our hunt team. And once again, if our level 1 analyst, level 2 analyst, or hunt team identify an incident, they would escalate that through our incident response process and turn it over to the business side. So how do we manage cybersecurity operations? We start out with where we are today, which is the current operations. The strategy is where we want to be. This is a cybersecurity operations strategy, the target operations, and the gaps. The difference between where we are and where we want to be are the gaps. We build a roadmap or a plan of action on how to get there, how to remediate those gaps. And let's talk about the deliverables. The deliverables from a cyber operations program include the controls themselves, CIS, NIST 853, PCI, ISO 27002, and all of those controls are implemented through an integrated security operations center. So to summarize security operations frameworks, we have, again, this is the operational layer, layer 3, cyber operations. We're still focusing on the critical assets and security by design. The critical assets, what's the thing, what does it do, what does it have access to, who controls it, and security by design are requirements to design upfront, in this case at the operational level, implementation, operations, monitoring during the attack, testing, verification, maintenance after the attack. The control standards include CIS controls, NIST 853 controls, PCI controls, ISO 27001 control, and other control standards. The threat detection and response framework, which we're going to get into more later in the class, is a new capability called security orchestration, automation, and response. But essentially, that's where the integrated SOC standard comes from. Basically, a security operations center that is more of a standard configuration that does these functions: orchestration, automation, and response. And then we have a SOC operating model that implements the SOC to protect our critical assets. And our critical assets include, before the attack, computers, laptops, user accounts, privileged user accounts, routers, switches, printers, cloud assets. During the attack, after the attack, these same assets are monitored through our SOC, following the security orchestration, automation, response framework mapped against the security controls such as CIS, NIST, PCI, or ISO. So the deliverables, we have 3 set deliverables: the target state, the current state, and the plan of actions and milestones. The system security plan describes the target state, where we want to be, and I'm just using the example of 20 critical controls. We want to implement fully those 20 critical controls. I could have used NIST 853 or ISO 27002 or PCI. The current state is where we are today with respect to those 20 critical controls. And the plan of action and milestone is the gaps and a roadmap to remediate the gaps against each of those 20 controls. And again, could be NIST 5318 control families, could be PCI 12 requirements, etc. The point is we want to know where we are today, where we want to be, which is the target state, and the milestones, the plan of action and milestones on how we improve our gaps in order to get to where we want to be. So here's a mapping of the entire program from a requirements perspective. Risk, engineering, and operations. Risk we covered in week 2, engineering week 3, operations week 4. Risk is layer 1, risk management framework, cybersecurity framework, risk reporting model, and you can see they all map to the stages of an attack, before, during, and after. CDM we use for engineering, CDM technical requirements, tools and sensors, and technical dashboard or the AWARE algorithm before, during, and after the attack. And then finally, operationally, we're looking at security control standards, threat detection and response framework, and SOC operating model before, during, and after the attack. So now we have a fully functional set of requirements that we can build our workloads from. Once we know what we're trying to do, then we have to go ahead and do it. And the workloads is how we go ahead and do it, which we'll start discussing in next week's lecture. But it all needs us to be mapping to our requirements in order to have an effective program. And here's a mapping of the frameworks to the deliverables. At the risk layer, we have the risk management framework, cybersecurity framework, and risk reporting model. And those map to 3 deliverables: strategy, policy, and report on risk. At the engineering layer, we have CDM technical architecture, tools and sensors, and dashboards, and those map to the 3 engineering deliverables: workloads, technologies, and dashboards. And finally, at the operations layer, we have the control standards, threat detection and response framework, and SOC operating model that map to the 3 deliverables, which we discussed earlier as a system security plan, a risk assessment, a plan of action, and milestones. System security plan talks about the current state of security. The risk assessment talks about the gaps between where we are and where we want to be. And the plan of action and milestones talks about how we improve our security in order to get from the current state to the desired state. So now I want to finish our discussion on the global healthcare crisis. We talked about it from a risk perspective in week 2, from an engineering perspective in week 3, and now in week 4 we'll talk about the healthcare crisis from an operational perspective. What controls do we have to put in place to actually mitigate the healthcare crisis? Once again, we're looking at it from a government perspective as well from a Massachusetts perspective. So here's the big picture. We have at the layer 1, we have the federal COVID risk management team, the president and vice president. At layer 2, we have the COVID engineering design team, which is the CDC, Fauci, and Birx. And at layer 3, we have the COVID operations team, the FEMA, under the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We're looking at likelihood and impact because this is a risk discussion. The likelihood is for 50 different states, what's the likelihood of infection? And what's the impact? What's the impact on individuals if you, in fact, do, if you are infected with COVID? And the whole goal there is to flatten the curve, is to try to turn the process around and reduce the number of infections and therefore reduce the number of fatalities. From a state perspective, what's the likelihood and what's the impact as well, measured at level 1, which is the governor, level 2, Health and Human Services, level 3 is the hospitals themselves. What is the likelihood, the number of COVID cases in Massachusetts, and what is the impact, the number of COVID fatalities in Massachusetts? From a risk management perspective, we talked about the 7 steps of risk management: prepare, which is a strategy and plan; categorize the patients, the providers, the pandemic, the spread; select a set of controls, and we created our own controls framework for COVID-19: identify and prevent before the attack, detect, contain during the attack, threat and restore, or treat and restore after the attack. Then we implement the controls, which we talked about this week, the actual controls that allow us to identify, prevent, detect, contain, treat, and restore. We want to make sure that those controls are working, so we assess those controls. We look at the control preparedness for PPE, face mask, ventilators, the cases and fatalities over time, the testing and contact tracing over time, the availability of the COVID vaccine. We want to then authorize the restoral of normal functions or implementing opening of the America again. What are the gating criteria? Downward trajectory, robust testing for individuals, employers, types of employers, phase 1, 2, 3 implementation. And then finally, we want to monitor. We want to monitor the system. We want to monitor the controls. We want to monitor the opening to make sure that we're still tracking positively in our remediation of this global healthcare pandemic. Here's a mapping of the controls themselves to the framework. Once again, we have 6 different functions in the framework: identify, prevent, detect, contain, treat, and restore. And underneath there, we have a set of controls. These are not CIS, these are not NIST 853, these are not PCI. These are controls that I kind of created, saying these are the controls that I would start with in order to mitigate any kind of a healthcare crisis or pandemic. Specifically, in this case, they would apply to COVID. So the point here is our next healthcare crisis, our next global pandemic, we should be better prepared because we have a framework and a set of controls that we can put in place before the attack, identify and prevent, during the attack, detect and contain, after the attack, treat and restore. And we have people responsible for each of those 6 different areas or capabilities, so that we can be more effective in mitigating the next global pandemic. The risk assessment approach: how well are we prepared? We want to step 1, set business mission objectives, high-level organizational directives for reopening or criteria. Once the scope of the pandemic reopening process has been determined, identify the related individuals, regulatory requirements, overall approach, who's going to be responsible, how are we going to do this, develop a current profile to determine the healthcare outcomes that we're currently seeing, do a risk assessment based on the criteria we use for risk, which happen to be those controls that we just discussed, those control capabilities, as well as the detailed controls. Determine a target profile, which is we're never going to be 100% ready to reopen. If we were 100% ready, the economy would have failed. So we want to make sure we determine a target profile where we think we're trending in a positive direction. We flatten the curve in such a way that we feel confident that we can reopen without having to roll back. Compare the current profile to the target profile, determine the gaps, create a prioritized action plan to address the gaps, and track implementation status and results. We want to do the map this to the engineering framework where each of these controls, the detailed controls, map to an engineering capability: identify, prevent, detect, contain, treat, and restore. We want to have dashboards that measure how well we're doing for each of these 6 different categories: the identify category, the prevent category, the detect, contain category, the treat, and restore category. And once again, the engineering architecture looks an awful lot like the CDM. We have the policy. We start with a policy, which is the desired state, which is where do we want to be for each of these 6 different categories for COVID. And the data flow is the actual state. Where are we today for each of these 6 different categories and controls that map to these categories? And we should have dashboards that show us. That's how we would effectively measure how well we're doing with this pandemic. These dashboards, these policies, this data that we're collecting from tools and sensors that really measure how effectively we're implementing the security controls. Again, dashboard at the federal level, scores, policies, federal risk indicator scores, COVID-19 intelligence, federal analysis and metrics, as well as at the state level, state dashboard, counts and risks and scores of at-risk populations, fundamental health information, vulnerabilities from CDM sensors, etc. And here's a mapping of our detailed controls, the operational controls, using our new quote-unquote COVID framework back to the key functions of the COVID program: identify, prevent, detect, contain, treat, and restore. And we mapped, again, these controls back to our framework. Under the framework, we again have 6 functions, and we have 24 categories. The 6 functions: identify, prevent, detect, contain, treat, and restore. The 24 categories: potential cases, confirmed recoveries, confirmed fatalities, boundary closing, social distancing, government shutdown, approved vaccine, test criteria, diagnostic criteria, antibody testing, contact tracing, government guidelines, early intervention, face mask, PPE. Under treat, first responders, healthcare workers, clinical trials, and oxygen ventilators. And under restore, government criteria, flattening the curve, rolling reentry, workplace practices and policies. And we have the detailed controls that allow us to measure how well we're doing with each of those 25 categories, which roll up to those 6 different functions. Then we need metrics and reporting, both on an individual statewide basis as well as on a national basis, to see how we're doing. And so this is the framework summary. At the national level, we have layer 1, 2, and 3 resources. We have the risk management framework, the federal healthcare framework, the risk reporting framework. At the layer 2, we have the technical requirements, which is engineering, tools and sensors, technical dashboards for COVID. And at layer 3, we have the pandemic controls, pandemic operating model, and the command center, where we map to get our metrics and our reporting. This is at the federal level. These would be the pandemic frameworks and the pandemic deliverables. At the government level, the U.S. national program. Under the frameworks, federal framework, risk framework, we have risk management framework, pandemic framework, and risk reporting model. For the deliverables, we have pandemic strategy, policy, and risk reporting. Under the pandemic engineering frameworks, we have technical architecture, tools and sensors, technical dashboard, which would be the scoring of the COVID. We would have pandemic engineering deliverables, which are workloads, technologies and practices, metrics and reporting. And at the operations, we'd have pandemic controls, operations models, command center reporting. And at the operations deliverables, we have a pandemic system plan, a risk assessment, and a plan of action and milestones. We repeat exactly that same information, but now instead of looking at our scope or our authorization boundary as the 50 states, we would look at our scope, our authorization boundary as a single state. In this case, it would be the state of Massachusetts. but we apply the same kinds of controls and frameworks to the state of Massachusetts that we apply to the federal government. Risk management framework, Massachusetts healthcare framework, Massachusetts risk reporting would be the layer 1 resources before, during, and after the attack of COVID. For engineering, we'd be Department of Public Health technical requirements, tools and sensors, technical dashboards for COVID, before, during, and after the attack. And for the operational layer 3 resources, healthcare system pandemic controls, basically looking at who's going to be treating COVID patients, healthcare system pandemic operating models, healthcare system pandemic response command center, so that we could measure how well we're treating at the operational level. And at the operational level, we'd be using those individual 48 COVID controls that we discussed that map back to engineering requirements, which then in fact map back to risk management requirements. And again, we have the same deliverables, only this time at a statewide level for pandemic frameworks and deliverables as we had earlier on a national level for all 50 states. So this way, if we all follow the same framework, we all follow the same models, we all have the same deliverables, it's going to be much easier to compare scores against the 50 states. And even at the individual control level, we can figure out which of those 48 controls is working, which of those 48 controls is not working. And in states where the control is working, we can model our controls in Massachusetts, if it doesn't happen to be working, to improve our outputs. That's the whole idea behind this whole course. The course is set up to establish frameworks and deliverables that can be repeated multiple times across any industry, across any set of assets, in a way to measure risk. The whole idea is measure risk, and the reason we want to measure risk is so that we can make good risk decisions versus bad risk decisions. And those same risk management practices, principles, criteria, frameworks, and deliverables can be used for risks other than cyber risks. For example, hurricane risks, for example, healthcare risks, for example, climate change risks. We can use these same principles for any type of risk management program. It's just that the controls would be different depending on the particular problem that we're trying to solve. But we would also have those controls frameworks which remain the same, because the framework would look at the details before, during, and after the pandemic, before, during, and after climate change, before, during, after a hurricane, before, during, after a cyber event. So that's the whole idea here of mapping back to a healthcare pandemic. You get the idea of how these principles, these practices could be applied against any type of risk. So that concludes week 4. Next week, we'll start talking about the workloads, and from here on out, we'll just focus on cybersecurity, but I wanted to make sure you understood that this is a model that can be used for any type of risk management.